The chamber was supposed to be ordinary, another day of stiff speeches and predictable talking points, when suddenly the air cracked like thunder. A senator's voice, sharp as a blade, cut through the hushed rows. A dismissive sneer aimed at Jasmine Crockett, questioning not just her credentials, but her very right to speak. Gasps rippled across the room. Cameras swung toward her, capturing the moment in high definition, the nation's collective breath tightening. It wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge to the very idea of dignity and belonging. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The velvet chairs, the marble columns, the faint echo of whispered staffers all seemed to tilt toward the woman at the center of the storm. Jasmine sat steady, shoulders squared, her eyes gleaming not with anger but with a kind of unshakable calm, as if she had been forged for this very instant. Across from her the senator leaned back, smirking, convinced that this humiliation would go unpunished. He had no idea the cameras were about to immortalize his mistake. Social media tickers began to flare as snippets leaked. Unbelievable exchange on the Senate floor. Progressive blogs lit up, hashtags brewed. On the far side of the country, college students paused mid-scroll, stunned by the confrontation flashing across their screens. In living rooms and subways and coffee shops, viewers leaned closer to their phones, hearts pounding with recognition and outrage. Even those who had never heard Jasmine Crockett's name before could feel the gravity. She wasn't just defending herself, she was standing for every immigrant daughter, every overlooked voice, every American told to wait their turn. Her silence in that moment wasn't weakness, it was the gathering of thunderclouds before a storm. And yet, under the marble dome, you could almost hear the countdown to something irreversible. Every second stretched, every heartbeat louder than the last. The senator's smirk widened, oblivious to the tide about to turn. Staffers exchanged anxious glances, sensing the tremor before an earthquake. But what came next left everyone gasping.
Long before that electrifying afternoon in the Senate chamber, tensions had been building like pressure beneath a fault line. For months, the nation had been embroiled in debates over voting rights, immigration pathways, and the dignity owed to underrepresented communities. The senator who flung the insult at Jasmine Crockett had carved out a public persona built on dismissiveness, a smirk and scorch style that played well with a certain base but alienated nearly everyone else. He had mocked hearings, belittled experts, and framed progressive reforms as foreign invasions. Each televised exchange added another crack to the veneer of civility on Capitol Hill. Against that backdrop, Jasmine Crockett's rise carried a different kind of symbolism. She wasn't merely a politician, she was a living rebuke to the notion that power belonged only to a narrow slice of America. Her biography, community advocacy, late-night study sessions, defending the voiceless in courtrooms where no cameras rolled, resonated with people who rarely saw themselves reflected in power. To her supporters, she was proof that the future could be more inclusive, more honest, more just. To her detractors, she was a threat precisely because she embodied what they had tried to suppress. The confrontation on the Senate floor, thus, wasn't a random clash. It was the collision of two worldviews, one clinging to an older order of privilege and exclusion, the other insisting on transparency, dignity, and progress. For millions of viewers who had grown tired of watching dignity be undermined on national television, the moment carried a charge that was deeply personal. They saw their own experiences of being talked over, doubted, or dismissed mirrored in Jasmine's poised silence. Reporters later revealed that the senator's staff had been planning a gotcha moment, hoping to box her into a corner. They thought a thinly veiled attack on her background and expertise would throw her off balance, providing a soundbite they could use to question her credibility. Instead, what they triggered was a living symbol of composure under fire. That image of Jasmine unflinching while a powerful man tried to reduce her raced across the internet like lightning. Commentators began drawing parallels to historical turning points where a single exchange shifted public sentiment. The stakes had grown beyond the chamber walls. Civil rights groups mobilized their followers. Immigrant families texted links to the video, and youth-led movements posted reaction clips that racked up millions of views in hours. It felt as though America's ongoing argument about who belongs and who gets to speak with authority had been distilled into a single encounter. In homes across the country, parents and children watched together, some tearing up, others clenching fists. The drama wasn't just political theater, it was about belonging, truth, and the moral spine of democracy itself. This wasn't the kind of spectacle that faded overnight. It was the kind of moment that redefined reputations, launched movements, and changed the vocabulary of debate. Even seasoned analysts, hardened by years of televised spats, admitted on air that something was different this time. "There's a real shift happening," one pundit whispered as footage replayed. "This isn't just about policy, it's about power." The realization settled like a drumbeat across social feeds and newsrooms alike. The story of Jasmine Crockett versus her detractor was bigger than either of them. And as the night wore on and the hashtags climbed, one question hung over every screen, every whispered conversation, every political war room trying to spin the narrative. How would she respond? Would she answer insult with fire, or would she unveil something none of them had anticipated? What happens next changes everything.
Long before that flashpoint in the Senate chamber, the man now facing a national backlash had spent years cultivating his image as a fearless crusader against political correctness. To his allies, he was a culture war hero. To his critics, he was a skilled manipulator of outrage. He rose from obscurity in state politics on a steady diet of provocation, railing against immigrant families, sneering at social safety nets, and turning hearings into gladiatorial arenas where empathy was mocked as weakness. His public persona was tailored for viral clips and fundraising emails, not for governance or bridge building. The contradictions in his story began early. While he thundered against government subsidies, records showed his family business thriving on federal contracts. While he decried elites, he vacationed with corporate lobbyists and slipped their talking points into his speeches. He cast himself as a small-town everyman, but quietly invested in offshore accounts. Each inconsistency was a crack in the facade, invisible to casual viewers, but glaring to anyone who took a closer look. Behind closed doors, staffers whispered about his temper. He was known for berating aides, demanding loyalty oaths, and firing anyone who questioned his tactics. Yet in public, he performed a jovial, folksy charm, shaking hands and calling constituents friend. That duality, swagger and smirk on stage, clenched fists behind the curtain, became a defining pattern. It also explained why, despite repeated scandals, he always seemed to bounce back. People underestimated how calculated his provocations were. But there were limits. Over the years, a string of controversies had accumulated like storm clouds. Ethics investigations into his campaign spending, questions about undisclosed donors, a leaked recording of him mocking constituents who spoke accented English. Each time he would go on television, dismiss the uproar as fake outrage, and pivot to a new attack on his favorite targets: immigrants, progressives, and anyone who dared challenge the traditional hierarchy of power. He wore the backlash as a badge of honor, mistaking notoriety for invincibility. The truth was, his strategy worked best when his opponents played his game, shouting back, matching insult for insult, becoming characters in his theater of conflict. What he never prepared for was someone who would stand still, unshaken, and let his performance collapse under its own weight.
That was the silent power Jasmine Crockett carried with her, a refusal to be baited, a steadiness that rendered his act clownish rather than commanding. Foreshadowing of his downfall had been visible in small moments. A committee hearing where he lost his temper and walked out mid-question. A town hall where high school students confronted him with his own voting record, leaving him visibly rattled. A viral clip in which he mocked a disabled veteran, only to be drowned out by boos. Each was a glimpse of the arrogance beneath the veneer. Each was a rehearsal for the larger unmasking that would occur on the Senate floor. Reporters and analysts often noted his fondness for theater metaphors. He would quip, "Politics is showbiz, and I'm the star." Yet the very camera lenses he relied on for power were also his undoing. They captured every sneer, every eye roll, every thinly veiled insult, archiving them for a public increasingly impatient with cruelty as entertainment. His greatest weapon, spectacle, was also the stage on which his contradictions stood naked. As this backstory leaked into the public consciousness during the days leading up to the confrontation, progressive and centrist audiences alike began connecting the dots. The insult to Jasmine Crockett wasn't an isolated misstep. It was part of a long chain of behavior revealing contempt for those he viewed as outsiders. And unlike past targets, Jasmine had the credibility, the composure, and the following to flip the script. The Senate, with its marble halls and hushed decorum, had witnessed countless debates, but this particular senator had turned it into a personal battlefield, convinced that disruption equaled dominance. In doing so, he ignored a critical truth. Every empire of intimidation eventually faces the moment when the crowd no longer cheers. By the time he directed his sneer towards Jasmine Crockett, millions were ready to see the mask slip. They were watching not just for entertainment, but for accountability. Even within his own ranks, there were signs of unease. Junior colleagues whispered that his antics were becoming liabilities. Donors grew nervous about his unpredictability. Staffers quietly updated their resumes, sensing a storm ahead. All of this simmered beneath the surface as he strode into the chamber that day, unaware that history's camera was already rolling. So when he fired that verbal shot at Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't just a gaffe, it was the culmination of years of arrogance meeting its reckoning. Every smirk, every contradiction, every scandal had led to this crucible, and as the chamber watched the silent weight of her response, a narrative older than the Republic began to echo. Power without humility eventually collapses. He did not know it yet, but the stage he had built to showcase his dominance was about to become the backdrop of his unraveling. The audience, in the chamber, on the internet, across the country, could feel it even if he couldn't. Something irreversible was about to happen, a turning point from which his carefully crafted persona could never return. What loomed ahead was not just another headline or another skirmish in the endless churn of partisan theater. It was a reckoning that would redefine both his career and the public's understanding of who truly holds power when the cameras roll. And as the next moment approached, the air itself seemed to tighten, as if everyone present knew they were seconds from a revelation that could upend the balance entirely.
Long before Jasmine Crockett became a name trending across social media and flashing across cable news chyrons, she was a little girl sitting cross-legged on the linoleum floor of a public library, tracing her finger under the words of borrowed books. Her parents, both first-generation Americans, worked back-to-back shifts, her mother in a hospital laundry room, her father repairing engines in a mechanic's bay where the air reeked of grease and grit. They taught her that America could be a promise rather than a threat, but only if people like them fought for a place in it. Each night they returned home exhausted, but still asked about her homework, still told her stories about perseverance and fairness. Those lessons rooted themselves deep, forming a quiet steel that would one day meet its test under the marble dome of the Senate. She had known the sting of being underestimated. In elementary school, a teacher once mispronounced her name so badly it became a joke whispered on the playground. In high school, A counselor discouraged her from applying to elite colleges, suggesting community work might be more realistic. Yet each slight only sharpened her resolve. She earned scholarships, juggled multiple jobs, and clawed her way into law school, specializing in civil rights and immigration law. She represented families pro bono who couldn't afford an attorney, standing with people whose accents, fears, and dreams mirrored her own family's. Her public service wasn't a stepping stone, it was a calling. She spent years in community centers where paint peeled from the walls, in courthouse hallways where parents sobbed as their children were led away. She argued before skeptical judges, faced hostile cross-examinations, and learned the power of composure in rooms stacked against her. That experience taught her something the senator across the aisle had never learned. Dignity isn't granted from above, it's claimed from within. When she finally entered politics, it wasn't through a cocktail fundraiser or a legacy network. It was at a folding table in a church basement where volunteers stapled flyers and brewed coffee in paper cups. Her campaign grew out of frustration and hope. Frustration with leaders who treated vulnerable communities as props, and hope that those communities could rise into power themselves. Even then, she refused to demonize opponents. Her approach was calm but unrelenting, listening to critics, absorbing attacks, and always returning to principle. She also understood the emotional landscape of identity and belonging. She had been the young attorney translating legal jargon into plain language for frightened families. She had been the daughter interpreting for her parents at government offices. She knew what it meant to stand in the middle of the system and feel invisible. That empathy became her armor and her weapon, a credibility impossible to fake, forged in years of lived struggle. Her rise in the Senate was, to some, a miracle, to others, an inevitability. She didn't arrive with a famous surname or inherited donor lists. She arrived with receipts, case files, victories for the underdog, grassroots coalitions built one block at a time. Colleagues began to notice her ability to remain unshaken under attack. Where others bristled or cracked, she held her center, voice steady, gaze unwavering. That steadiness wasn't passivity. It was a quiet mastery of timing, like a boxer who knows exactly when to throw the counterpunch. And counterpunching became necessary. Even before the infamous Senate exchange, she had faced smear campaigns, doctored videos, and anonymous threats. She never responded with insults, she responded with evidence. She never fed the outrage cycle, she broke it. That self-discipline, the ability to hold still when provoked, became her signature. It also became the quality that terrified opponents who thrived on chaos. Outside the chamber, she cultivated a base that was both diverse and fiercely loyal. Immigrant families saw their own journeys reflected in hers. Young activists viewed her as a mentor who actually listened. Even some skeptical moderates found themselves admiring her restraint in an age of performative shouting. Slowly, she carved out a new archetype, not the loudest in the room, but the most unshakable. Her office walls bore reminders of where she'd come from, a photo of her parents holding her law school diploma, a thank you note from a client she'd defended at risk of her own safety, a grainy picture of her first campaign team packed into that church basement. Each artifact reminded her that power is a trust, not a trophy. By the time she sat in that Senate chair on the day of the confrontation, she was carrying more than her own story. She was carrying the hopes of people who had been told, "Wait your turn," or "Tone it down," or "You don't belong here." She had become a vessel for their frustration and their belief that dignity could still triumph over cynicism. In interviews, she often said her composure came from her parents' example. "She taught me," she once explained, "that you don't have to be the loudest to be the strongest." That line had been quoted in graduation speeches and activist circles alike. It had become a mantra for a new generation of leaders who saw politics not as theater,
but as moral stewardship. So when the insult landed in the Senate chamber, when the senator across the aisle thought he had reduced her to silence, Jasmine was not just another lawmaker caught off guard. She was a lawyer who had stood beside families facing deportation orders. She was a daughter who had navigated bureaucracy for parents who couldn't. She was a public servant who had chosen the long road over the shortcut. Every experience, every injustice endured, every late night spent drafting legislation or comforting a client had been a rehearsal for this exact confrontation. And that's why this moment was destiny.
The chamber pulsed like a drumbeat as the exchange began in earnest. At first, it was procedural. Motions, counter-motions, the dry cadence of legislative language. But beneath the formalities, tension thickened, as visible as heat rising from asphalt. The senator leaned forward over his microphone, voice curling with disdain. "With all due respect," he drawled, "perhaps the gentlewoman from Texas should leave policy to those with more experience." The insult was cloaked in parliamentary decorum, but everyone could hear the sneer tucked inside. Jasmine Crockett raised her eyes slowly, as if lifting the weight of 100 voices. She did not interrupt. Instead, she adjusted the papers in front of her, the tiniest flick signaling composure. Around her, aides shifted uneasily. In the press gallery, reporters' fingers hovered over keyboards. They knew the senator's tactics, but something about this exchange felt different, heavier, as if the air itself were holding its breath. "Order," the chair intoned, but the word floated uselessly. The senator pressed again, upping the ante with a new insinuation about her qualifications. Across the room, an audible murmur rippled. Staffers, spectators, even some colleagues exchanging glances. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine's face, calm, unreadable, her jaw set like stone carved for a monument. The senator's voice rose, growing sharper, his gestures widening as though volume could substitute for evidence. Cable networks began breaking in live, chyron bars flashing across the screen. Heated confrontation on Senate floor. On social media, clips spread in real time. Commentators posted breathless updates. "This is unprecedented," one wrote. Another tweeted, "He's overplaying his hand, watch her." Hashtags proliferated. Thousands of people who had never tuned into a Senate session before now streamed the feed, hearts thudding. Inside the chamber, small tells betrayed the shifting mood. A colleague across the aisle rolled his eyes at the senator's tone. Another fidgeted with a pen, clearly uncomfortable. Even those who disagreed with Jasmine's politics seemed uneasy at the overt condescension unfolding before them. Yet the senator plowed on, mistaking silence for surrender, mistaking restraint for weakness. Jasmine's hands remained folded on the desk. She breathed in slowly, an almost imperceptible shift. Her eyes flicked toward the visitors' gallery, college students, veterans, activists, and back to the senator. In that glance lay a message. She saw them. She carried them. She would not let them down. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some whispered into microphones, narrating the drama like sportscasters. "She's not biting. He's trying everything." Another added, "Look at his hands. He's losing it." The floor, usually a theater of dull speeches, had become an arena. And yet, amid the noise, Jasmine's stillness began to stand out, like a fixed point while the world spun. The senator's words turned sharper, his attacks clumsier, mixing procedural critiques with personal jabs. He invoked her background, her years of activism, twisting them as liabilities rather than credentials. Viewers across the country felt the sting. Immigrant families watching from living rooms clenched their fists, recognizing the tactic. The insinuation that someone like them was never enough, no matter how hard they worked. But something else was happening. Each new barb seemed to echo louder, not because it landed, but because it revealed desperation. Comment sections lit up with viewers calling out his tactics. "He's unraveling," one wrote. "She's playing chess while he's playing checkers," posted another. The spectacle that once empowered him was now exposing him. Meanwhile, Jasmine's allies leaned forward in their seats, sensing an inflection point. They had seen her in hearings before, but this was different. The stakes higher, the audience vaster, the symbolism unmistakable. A staffer later described it as watching a storm build behind glass. Even on his own side, a few heads bent together, whispers passing like contraband. The clock ticked. Questions hung in the air. Would she respond in kind? Would she rise and walk out? Would she deliver the retort everyone hoped for? Outside the chamber, cars slowed at intersections as drivers watched on their phones. In coffee shops, strangers turned their screens to share the feed with people at neighboring tables. A collective anticipation gathered as though an entire nation were inhaling at once. Jasmine finally shifted in her seat, uncrossing her hands. It was a small movement, but the camera caught it. Reporters in the gallery went silent. The senator paused mid-sentence, perhaps sensing dimly that the ground beneath him had begun to tilt. For the first time that afternoon, he looked less sure, his eyes darting to the clock, to the chair, back to her. And then, in that charged silence, a new energy coursed through the room, the sense that roles were about to reverse, that the narrative he thought he controlled was slipping away. The crowd murmured, a low tide rising. The senator drew a breath to continue, but his voice cracked just slightly, until suddenly everything flipped.
The chamber fell into a sudden, almost sacred silence, all eyes fixed on Jasmine Crockett. The senator, still flushed from his barrage, seemed confident, but even in that moment there was the faintest flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a recognition that the rules of this encounter were about to shift. Jasmine took a breath, a slow, deliberate inhale that seemed to draw in the weight of every viewer, every family, every unheard voice that had ever been dismissed. She leaned forward, her fingers brushing lightly against the papers in front of her, a small motion that somehow signaled the storm to come. "Thank you," she began, her tone steady, measured. The words themselves were unremarkable, almost understated, yet they hung in the air like a soft drumbeat before the crescendo. Cameras zoomed in, microphones seemed to tilt closer. Her calm presence contrasted sharply with the senator's restless gestures, his hand tapping on the desk, his smirk tightening into a thin line. The audience in the chamber, the gallery, and millions watching across the nation felt it. The moment had pivoted, invisibly but irrevocably. She started with facts, her voice unflinching. Each statistic, each document, each reference was precise, chosen to dismantle not only his arguments, but his credibility. She spoke of voting records, of policies he had opposed yet silently benefited from, of constituents ignored and promises broken. The senator's hands twitched as she enumerated them, his composure thinning with every line. Her words were surgical, meticulous, delivered with the quiet force of someone who had lived this scrutiny, endured worse, and emerged not just unbroken, but stronger. And then she paused, just for a heartbeat, a small, deliberate silence that seemed to stretch across the chamber. In that pause, reporters scribbled furiously, social media notifications exploded, and viewers across living rooms and coffee shops leaned closer to their screens. Every pause carried meaning, reflection, power, inevitability. The senator shifted uneasily in his seat, sensing that the calm she wielded was not weakness, but a weapon he could not parry. She continued, her sentences weaving a narrative that intertwined principle and personal accountability. She cited moments where the senator had mocked those striving to achieve the American dream, moments that now seemed indefensible in light of her methodical recounting. She did not raise her voice, did not snap back with theatrics. She let the truth land with the weight of inevitability. Each revelation hit like a hammer against a fragile structure, and the cracks were beginning to show. The cameras caught every micro-expression, the tightening jaw, the flicker of a forced smile, the quick glance to an aide for reassurance. Reporters began whispering into live mics. "He's faltering. She's in complete control. The tide is turned." On social media, viewers were already amplifying the moment. Hashtags exploded with her name, clips looping her calm dismantling of his arguments. Tweets like, "She doesn't even have to shout and he's crumbling," and "This is masterclass composure," filled feeds by the second. Memes began to circulate even before the debate concluded, capturing the irony and inevitability of the reversal. She moved seamlessly from evidence to principle, showing not only the senator's missteps, but contrasting them with her own record. Decades of service, tangible results, and an unbroken commitment to justice. The distinction was stark: arrogance versus diligence, spectacle versus substance, performative aggression versus lived integrity. Every listener could feel the moral weight, the unmistakable framing of hero and villain, as if the chamber itself acknowledged the imbalance. Then she punctuated her argument with a line that seemed both natural and devastating, a concise, undeniable truth that captured years of struggle in a single phrase. The senator's eyes widened, his hands froze mid-gesture. Even some of his allies shifted in their seats, a whisper of doubt threading through them. Journalists captured the moment live, viewers shared it instantly, and social media accounts exploded with commentary from citizens and celebrities alike. Everyone watching seemed to understand the gravity. This was a rare spectacle, a public reckoning carried out with both precision and grace. Jasmine's next move was subtle but lethal. She referenced a direct comparison, policies he had supported under one administration that contradicted his rhetoric under another. The factual juxtaposition, delivered with serene confidence, stripped the performative armor he had long relied on. The senator opened his mouth to respond, but no words could land. The room seemed to pause with him, hanging on her next phrase. Every breath he took now emphasized the gap between his faltering composure and her unshakable command. Audience reactions swelled in imagined waves. Students in dorm rooms cheered softly into their headphones. Activists in city apartments shared clips with captions like, "Finally, someone who speaks truth to power." And immigrant families felt a rare pride, seeing someone who mirrored their struggles stand unwavering against contempt. Every phone screen, every office monitor, every set of eyes collectively registered the narrative. Arrogance had met its match. She did not allow the momentum to falter. With the final sequence of her response, Jasmine integrated human stories into the analysis, reminding the chamber why policy and dignity matter, and why the consequences of arrogance extend beyond the chamber walls. She grounded abstract statistics in lived experiences, painting a picture of an America that could thrive if honesty, courage, and empathy guided its leaders. The effect was profound. The senator's smirk faded entirely, replaced with a tight, controlled mask, a faint tremor of panic just visible in his hands. And then came the final beat, subtle, deliberate, yet devastating. She concluded not with fury, but with moral clarity. The room absorbed it, some leaning forward, some exhaling audibly, some already reaching for their devices to share the moment. Her calm had become a tidal wave. The senator's theatrics, now exposed, seemed almost comical in comparison. News alerts flashed. Senate confrontation turns dramatic. Crockett delivers masterful response. Arrogance meets its match. Yet even in that peak, Jasmine knew the work was larger than a single exchange. The chamber's applause, the flashes of cameras, the social media roar, all of it mattered, but it was only the beginning. She had delivered the dismantling, the clarifying truth, the cinematic reversal of power. The public had witnessed not just a rebuttal, but a lesson. Dignity, preparation, and unshakable principle could outmatch arrogance every time. The senator slumped back slightly in his chair, realizing that his performative dominance had been undone. His allies whispered, his aides flinched, and reporters typed feverishly, framing the story for a nation ready to discuss, debate, and analyze every word. Across the country, people shared the clip in record numbers, activists and ordinary citizens alike, marveling at the poise, at the precision, at the inevitability of the moment. Even those who had doubted her capacities were now nodding, acknowledging that she had been ready for this fight in ways that transcended rhetoric. And as the echoes of the chamber's reaction reverberated far beyond its marble walls, it was clear that the senator's smirk had finally met its match, and the narrative had shifted irrevocably. The camera lenses, the live feeds, the tweets, the hashtags, they had all captured the same truth. The hero had not only responded, she had redefined the terms of engagement, elevated the discourse, and made the world witness her mastery. But the ripple effects were just beginning.
The moment the cameras cut away, the real eruption began. Social media ignited as if struck by lightning. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm dismantling of her opponent spread across platforms at breakneck speed. Hashtags multiplied like wildfire. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag dignity over arrogance. Hashtag mic drop moment. Within minutes, the video had been watched by millions, shared and reshared, each iteration layering additional commentary, memes, and reactions. Every feed, from Twitter to TikTok, became a theater of awe, outrage, and admiration. Viewers dissected her poise, applauded her restraint, and marveled at the contrast between her composed delivery and the senator's unraveling. Celebrities and public figures weighed in, amplifying the shockwaves. An award-winning actor tweeted, "This is how courage looks in action. Watch closely." Progressive politicians shared the clip, praising her intellect and steadiness. Influencers uploaded slow-motion breakdowns, pausing at each subtle gesture, each measured word, each micro-expression that revealed the senator's crumbling facade. Across the country, ordinary citizens joined the chorus, posting screenshots, reaction videos, and personal stories of times they had felt underestimated or dismissed. It wasn't just entertainment, it was validation for millions who had long felt invisible in the halls of power. Mainstream media scrambled to catch up. Headlines appeared within hours. Crockett's calm crushes Senate bully. Dignity triumphs on Capitol floor. Historic moment captured live. Editorials dissected the debate for nuance. Political analysts parsed every strategic move, and pundits debated whether the senator's career could survive the humiliation. Late-night hosts replayed the exchange, emphasizing her measured grace and the stark contrast to the opponent's flustered aggression. The footage became a teaching moment, a case study in preparation, restraint, and the power of truth. Even beyond politics, the cultural ripples were undeniable. Schools shared the clips in civics and debate classes. Community organizations highlighted her example of leadership under pressure. Immigrant advocacy groups posted stories of families who felt seen for the first time on a national stage. Young people, particularly women and first-generation Americans, sent messages. She gave us hope. She showed us strength. She proved it's possible to stand tall even when they tried to tear you down. Across dinner tables and living rooms, conversations erupted, animated and inspired about who belongs, who deserves respect, and who defines America's moral compass. In Washington,
The senator's office felt the blow. Staffers scrambled to spin the narrative, but the raw power of the footage was unstoppable. Allies whispered in hallways that he had overplayed his hand, that his performance had become a cautionary tale rather than a spectacle. Donors began questioning the optics. Even seasoned colleagues recognized that the balance of influence had shifted. What had been a simple personal attack now looked like a watershed moment, not just for Crockett's career, but for the tenor of public discourse. Online, memes proliferated with astonishing speed. One depicted Jasmine standing in sunlight while the senator wilted under storm clouds, captioned simply, "Dignity always wins." Another showed a chessboard with her calmly making the final move while he flailed, labeled "Masterclass in Strategy." The humor and symbolism only amplified the message. This was not just a debate, it was a narrative reversal, a public reckoning broadcast to millions of witnesses. Political commentators began to frame it as a turning point in American civics. Some argued it signaled a generational shift, younger leaders rising on competence and empathy rather than theatrics and intimidation. Activists pointed to it as proof that preparation, integrity, and composure could challenge entrenched power structures. Journalists noted that moments like these rarely go unnoticed. The long tail of social media ensured the exchange would reverberate far longer than a traditional press cycle. Even internationally, the clip was shared, with news outlets highlighting the stark contrast between arrogance and measured leadership. For diasporic communities, it was affirming. Someone who shared their heritage and values had demonstrated not just skill, but moral authority on a global stage. Across continents, viewers tweeted in solidarity, signaling that the moment transcended American politics, tapping into universal narratives of justice, fairness, and courage. Yet the most profound impact was personal. For those who had struggled in silence, who had faced condescension or bias, Jasmine's example became a mirror and a roadmap. Parents showed it to their children. Mentors shared it with their protégés. Activists embedded it into training sessions for civic engagement. Her calm, strategic dismantling of power abuse became a symbol that dignity, intellect, and preparation could prevail against arrogance and prejudice. And in the corridors of power, the senator himself had no choice but to reckon with it. He realized that the theatrics he had relied upon for years now worked against him. The optics were undeniable, the moral clarity stark, and the momentum irreversible. Analysts on cable news repeatedly replayed her composure, emphasizing that charisma alone could no longer dominate the narrative when met with unwavering integrity. Yet the hero wasn't done rewriting the narrative.
By now, the chamber had settled into a hush, the echoes of the confrontation still lingering in the polished marble. Jasmine Crockett had not only survived the storm, she had reshaped it. The senator's smirk had vanished, replaced with a pale recognition that spectacle and arrogance alone could not command authority. What remained was clarity, precision, and a moral victory earned not through spectacle, but through steadfast principle. The lesson was universal. Dignity outlasts aggression, preparation outshines bluster, and truth carries a weight that performative power can never match. Across the nation, viewers understood it instinctively. Families watching from living rooms, students streaming on laptops in dorm rooms, immigrants listening from kitchens far from the capital, all felt the subtle uplift of recognition, the affirmation that justice, fairness, and courage could indeed prevail. In one measured display, Jasmine had reframed the narrative, turning what had been intended as humiliation into a platform for integrity, turning attacks into testimony of competence and empathy. Every barb thrown at her had become a spotlight, revealing the virtues of those who endure, persevere, and rise above petty cruelty.
Her response crystallized a truth too often overlooked, that leadership is not about dominance or spectacle, but about moral consistency and the willingness to serve beyond personal gain. While her opponent had sought to entertain with aggression, she had taught a lesson in fortitude. Each careful word, each deliberate pause, each unshakable gaze became a testament to the idea that a person rooted in justice can rewrite the rules of engagement, even in spaces designed to intimidate or marginalize. This confrontation was more than a political skirmish. It was a reflection of the broader struggle for identity, representation, and fairness. The audience recognized that Jasmine's example extended beyond her individual triumph. It represented the collective victories of those historically silenced, of voices once dismissed, and of communities long told they did not belong in positions of influence. In her victory, they found validation and inspiration, proof that perseverance and integrity could reshape narratives imposed by power and prejudice. Social media, once a battleground for fleeting outrage, became a stage for reflection. Clips of her poised delivery and unflinching logic circulated alongside messages of hope and solidarity. Viewers wrote stories of personal triumph, of struggles faced and obstacles overcome, connecting their own journeys to the courage demonstrated in that chamber. For many, the moment became a moral touchstone, a reminder that resilience is contagious and that standing for principle can reverberate far beyond a single debate or a single day. Even in Washington, the atmosphere had shifted. Colleagues from both sides of the aisle remarked on the demonstration of leadership they had witnessed. Mentors and public servants noted that the exchange would be studied for years as an example of strategy infused with ethical grounding. And while political battles would continue, the moral arc of this encounter was unmistakable. Dignity, preparation, and empathy were not just desirable traits, they were transformative. Jasmine's own framing of the moment carried the weight of inspiration. She spoke not of victory over an individual, but of the opportunity to set a standard for discourse, civility, and accountability. She transformed personal confrontation into public lesson, turning the spotlight intended for humiliation into a beacon of universal truth. In doing so, she reminded viewers that leadership is measured not by the ferocity of one's attacks, but by the integrity with which one responds to them. By the time the cameras turned away and the chamber returned to a procedural routine, the resonance of her words remained. The moral lesson was simple but profound. The arc of justice bends toward those who act with courage and principle. Power wielded without empathy falters, while strength coupled with dignity inspires. This was a victory not just for one senator, one lawmaker, or one debate, but for every individual striving to stand firm in the face of intimidation, prejudice, or systemic inequity. And so, in the aftermath of that iconic exchange, the audience understood the stakes had been higher than politics alone. They saw the truth of perseverance, the value of moral courage, and the enduring power of dignity. It was a reminder that each of us, in our own arenas, faces moments that test our integrity and resolve, and that how we respond defines not only our character, but the stories we leave behind. And here's why this matters to you.
Elizabeth Warren's acknowledgement of Jasmine Crockett's brilliance wasn't just a polite nod in a hallway or a fleeting soundbite. It was a moment that crystallized the entire story we've witnessed. It tied together struggle and triumph, principle and courage, showing that standing tall in the face of arrogance earns recognition, respect, and lasting impact. The video title wasn't hype, it was truth. A seasoned senator saw what millions had already felt. This was a leader forged by experience, integrity, and relentless commitment to justice. As the credits of the debate fade in your mind, consider what it represents. Dignity matters. Preparation matters. The courage to stand firm for truth, even when the world is watching, matters. Jasmine's story isn't just about one exchange in one chamber. It's a blueprint for how individuals can challenge unfair systems, inspire communities, and redefine what leadership looks like. Every insult she faced, every expectation she defied, every pause she took before speaking was a lesson in resilience for all of us. Now it's your turn to carry that lesson forward. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that courage can outshine cruelty. Discuss it with friends, family, and colleagues, and let it spark conversations about justice, dignity, and accountability. Subscribe to stay connected to narratives that uplift, inspire, and illuminate the battles that shape our world. Comment, engage, and be part of the movement that refuses to accept mediocrity or malice as the status quo. Together, we are witnesses to a moment that matters and participants in the ongoing story of empowerment, identity, and shared purpose. Step into it. Amplify it. Let it remind you every single day that integrity has power and every voice matters. The story continues, and you are part of it.